Alright, hi, I'm Alex, the pedantic skeptic, and I am going to be making a response to Answers in Genesis, um, Mandelbrot set, Atheist's Worst Nightmare, and I am curious about it, so let's just dive right in.
I dare say there is
Oh, Jesus. Um, this is pretty quiet audio.
no secular or atheistic explanation for what I'm going to share with you. This secret code only makes sense in the Christian worldview. So there's a
Okay, um, well, I would like to see this. I do want to just quickly put a disclaimer out there that if your goal is to reach atheists, which I'm not convinced they really are that concerned about this, they really just want to stroke the egos of people who already believe all of their nonsense. Um, and before I get into that, I should say that acceptance of evolution is not just an atheistic thing. There are plenty of Christians and people of all sorts of religious beliefs who accept evolution, and it's conceivable that there could be atheists who don't accept evolution. Maybe they believe in some weird version of panspermia, where like precursor cells to everything just landed here from outer space. Answers in Genesis didn't patent not going where the evidence follows.
movie a few years ago, National Treasure, where Nicolas Cage finds a secret code on the back of the Declaration of Independence.
Is he really quoting a movie? Um, oh, that's not a fun spot to pause this at. Um, I'm gonna turn the closed captions on, just because, the audio quality on this video, it's not coming in very loud, and I have a pretty good sense of hearing, but I do want to make sure that I'm sensitive to people who might be watching this and may not have the best ability to hear, and unfortunately this means that it may be harder. Like, I like to watch a lot of videos where I'm like in the middle of doing something, and so I'm just listening rather than watching. And so you may need to actually watch the screen in order to get a handle on what's going on, and I apologize for that. Um, I should also say this video is probably going to be multiple parts because I can speak for quite a while, and this is, an almost 40-minute video. And, like, you've seen me take 3-minute videos and make an hour-long response, and so there's no way I'm going to do this in one shot. Um, unless, it really is poor quality stuff that doesn't have any substance to it. But, I do want to, make people aware that, things that happen in movies don't necessarily, correlate with what happens in reality.
And it leads him to other clues and so on. And obviously, the code was put there by very intelligent people, and that it implies intelligence when you find a code.
Normally, I'd fact check, but I'm not gonna go googling the plot to National Treasure or whatever the fuck this movie was. It's not really important for this response.
Like that. What if there were a code?
I just also wanted to mention this guy spoke now, what, 4 years ago, and Answers in Genesis YouTube just published this a month ago.
Embedded in numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. What if there was a secret code embedded in them that we finally got around to discovering? What would that imply? What if there was a message inside numbers? What would that imply? It would tell.
Um, I mean, you could make messages out of anything. You could see patterns. That's what we have a very uncanny ability to do, is to recognize patterns. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was someone or something out there to communicate something to you. It's like you see a cloud and, like, oh, that cloud looks like, an ice cream cone. That cloud looks like an elephant. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something making you, trying to tell you something about ice cream, or,
tell us something about the intelligence of the person who made numbers. Now, we don't often think about God creating numbers because they're abstract. We think about God creating animals and stars and planets and so on. But numbers, God is responsible for them as well. Even though they're abstract and conceptual, God's sovereign over the abstract just as much as he is the physical universe. And as a matter of fact, there is a secret code built into numbers, and it is mind-blowing. And this is something that I read about when I was pretty young, really, and it was mind-blowing to me, and I want to share this with you. We're going to talk first about sets. Now, a set in mathematics is just what you think it is. It's a group of, in this case, numbers that have a common defined property.
So far, so good. I'm following along. I don't know where he's going to go with this.
And so you can have different types of sets out there. And in most sets, some numbers are included in the set and other numbers are excluded from the set.
Sounds about right. I don't have objections yet.
This is pretty easy, and it depends on how you define the set. So you could have the set of even numbers, those numbers that are evenly divisible by 2. And in that set, those numbers would be included in it, and those other numbers would be excluded from it. That's pretty easy.
I guess, yeah.
That's the set of even numbers. We could consider the set of negative numbers. Now that's a different set, isn't it? And so a different set of numbers will be included in there, and then those other ones will be excluded. Now for those two sets, you can tell just by looking at the number whether or not it belongs, right? In this case, if it doesn't have a little negative sign in front of it, it doesn't belong. And if it does belong. So that's pretty easy. You can tell just by looking at the number. But there are some sets that have a more complicated definition, and you can't tell just by looking at the number whether or not it belongs. And so
all right, quick, everybody. All the numbers whose absolute value is greater than 4. I'm just kidding.
We're going to talk about a particular set that's called the Mandelbrot set. This was discovered in the late 1970s, early 1980s.
All right, set of all numbers C for which the sequence Z and what is Z subscript and maybe he'll explain it.
Named after the person who really discovered this, Benoit Mandelbrot. He was
oh, it's Z to the N. So
a math guy and a computer guy. He worked at IBM. This set is defined according to this little formula that you see right here, where it's the set of all numbers, C. C is a number that is potentially part of the Mandelbrot set. We're testing it, for which this other number, Z, remains small according to this little formula. And it looks very complicated.
What? It remains small, even... What?
Complicated, but it's really not. I'll take you through it. The little n just means that that's a particular value of Z. N plus 1 is the next value of Z. So there's lots of values of Z. There's a sequence. And if that sequence...
So that means the first Z squared plus C is going to equal the second Z squared, whereas the third Z squared plus C is going to equal the fourth Z.
Sequence of Z stays small, then the other number C is part of the Mandelbrot set. On the other hand, if the sequence of Z gets very big, if it goes 1 to 100, a million, a billion, then C is not part of the Mandelbrot set.
I mean, how are we defining small versus big numbers? I mean, like, where do you draw the line between something being a small versus a big number, especially when numbers are infinite? You know, like, is 666 a big number or a small number?
And we'll do a couple of examples to let this sink in. It's pretty straightforward, really. So we're going to ask, is the number 1 part of the Mandelbrot set? So C equals 1, okay? And we're going to plug that into our formula then. So we have Z squared plus 1, because that's the number
Yeah, but what the fuck is z? You still need to give me
We're
z.
testing. That becomes the new value of z. Now, the first value of z is 0 by definition. So that's the first value. So we plug that in, and we have 0 squared, which is 0, plus 1 is 1. Yeah, 0 squared
Okay.
plus 1 is 1. So that's the next value of z, okay? And what we'll do is we'll put that 1 back into the formula. That's the new value of z. So now we have 1 squared, which is 1, plus 1 is 2, okay? And you plug that back in, so we have 2 squared is 4. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. Okay, you're getting this. You put it back in. 5 squared, 25, plus 1 is 26. Okay, we put that back in. 26 squared is a big number.
Now I'm confused. So we go from fucking 0 squared is 0, and plus 1 is 1. So 0, so that would be 0 plus 1. Great. Then we go 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, that's fine. 2 plus 1. But if you have 2 squared plus 1, if z equals 2, then that's the second z, so z2 is 2 squared plus 1. That's not equal to 3. That's equal to 5. This is just give me a minute, because what the fuck? Yeah, this is a really weird, this is really strange. Okay, so this guy is taking an arbitrary, what's it called? Mathematical whatever. I'm not a mathematician, I'm a biologist by trade. But, okay, so I guess I kind of understand what's going on here. I don't know.
And you put that back in. Okay, now you see what's happening here? Is the sequence of z staying small? No.
No.
So is the number 1 part of the Mandelbrot set?
No.
No, because it has to stay small for it to belong. There's one more complication, and then we get to the really cool stuff. The other complication is that the Mandelbrot set also includes what are called complex and imaginary numbers. Okay, so an imaginary number is a number that when you square it, you get a negative number. And that's a little hard for us to understand, and so they
So, like, the square root of -1 is an imaginary number, yes.
call them imaginary. It's just a name. I hate that they have that name because it makes it sound like they don't exist. You know, they're fabricated. No, they do exist. Imaginary numbers do exist. And to add insult to injury, the
I mean, things can exist and not be real.
numbers that are not imaginary they call real. But that's just terminology. Both are equally true, let's put it that way. But how do we have a number that times itself is negative? And it's represented by a lowercase I. That's the kind of the primary imaginary number when I times I is -1. How do we make sense of that? After all, imaginary numbers are not positive because a positive number squared is positive.
A negative number squared is, by definition, positive.
And yet, the imaginary number times itself is negative. Imaginary numbers are not negative because a negative number squared is also positive. And imaginary numbers are not 0 because 0 squared is 0. Weird. So we have a number that's not positive, it's not negative, and it's not 0. And that leaves us kind of scratching our heads a little bit. We have trouble with that. Well, I got news for you. Not everything in this universe is intuitive. If you've ever had a class in quantum mechanics, you know, the universe doesn't work always the way that we expect it to. You know,
Okay, first of all, this guy kind of looks like Adolf Hitler without the mustache, but, like, and I'm not trying to attack looks, I just have, like, really bad ADHD, and this guy's not helping. Like, I want to know how this is the atheist's worst nightmare. I mean, like, this is a nightmare, I'll agree. I don't think it's unique to atheists, though. I think this is a nightmare for anybody who doesn't, like, know math all that well.
our intuition really is based on experience. And the fact is most adults don't have experience with imaginary numbers, and so they seem strange.
I mean, most adults don't have experience with math in general, at least in America, unfortunately, but that's a whole other tangent.
But it's just a matter of experience. When you were a little kid, negative numbers probably didn't make a lot of sense, right? You know, I can have 1 apple, I can have 2 apples. How can I have negative 2 apples? That doesn't.
I mean, I had a pretty advanced mathematical concept when I was a kid. I mean, like, you know, maybe when I was 2, not so much, but from a pretty early age, I kind of understood that because, numbers are, vector and not scalar, they, can be negative. I had no problem understanding that. I mean, it's just a number.
Make sense. How can you have
When you think about it, when you subtract something, you're just adding a negative number to the number you're subtracting from, technically. You know, that's really all it is.
less than nothing? You get a little bit older, you get a bank account, suddenly negative numbers make a lot of sense, right? Yes, I can have less than nothing.
Yeah,
Well, imaginary numbers are the same way.
overdrafting sucks.
You gain a little experience and you find, yes, there are numbers that when you square them, you get a negative, but they're not positive, they're not negative, and they're not 0. How do we make sense of that? One way to do it is if you consider a number line. So here we have a number line. Now, the positive numbers are to the right of 0 along.
Just a quick heads up, it's completely arbitrary, technically, whether the positive numbers are on the right or the left. As long as all the positive numbers are on the same side and all the negative numbers are on the other side, you're good.
Along that number line. The negative numbers are to the left of 0 along that number line. So how do we represent a number that's not positive, not negative, and not 0? Well, you put it up above the number line like that. It's not on the number line. It's on a different axis. And by multiplying I by the other real numbers, you can have all kinds of imaginary numbers. And you can think of them as being on a different axis. So the real numbers are along this axis, the imaginary numbers are along that axis. And that makes sense. You can see that the imaginary number, it's not positive. because it's not to the right of 0. It's not negative because it's not to the left of 0, and yet it's not 0. That kind of makes sense. And then you can also have numbers that are called complex, and they're off axis. They're called complex because they have a real part and an imaginary part. But it's one number with two parts. And usually the real part is represented by the x-axis, and then the imaginary part is represented by the y-axis.
When do we get to the part where this is apparently, somehow proof of God? I mean, I'm waiting.
And so you can plot any number in a plane by those two components, the real component being the x and the imaginary component being the y. That's kind of neat. I can represent any number on a plane. Very convenient. So the Mandelbrot set also includes these imaginary and complex numbers. And the only thing you need to remember, they obey all the ordinary rules of algebra. It's just that when you multiply I by itself, you get -1. That's the only thing you have to remember. What we can do then is we can make a map, because I'm trying to figure out if there's a pattern to the numbers that belong to the Mandelbrot set. And it turns out there is. But it's not obvious, right? Because you can't tell just by looking at a number whether it's going to belong or not. You have to run it through that formula, and that's kind of tedious. But in the 1980s, computers were starting to get fast enough where they could iterate that formula a number of times, and they could analyze to see whether z is getting big or staying small. And so,
I mean, I still want to know what you're defining as staying small. Maybe the Wikipedia article. Let me go back to this for a sec. Oh, so it's a set of numbers for which the function, whatever this is, does not diverge to infinity. Okay.
So what we can do is we can have the computer check all these different points, and we'll see if there's a pattern to the Mandelbrot set. And so we'll take the points that belong to the Mandelbrot set, and we'll color those black. That's arbitrary. That's the way Benoit Mandelbrot did it, and we follow his example. So, and you have the computer check more points, and you find that all those points right there belong to the Mandelbrot set. When you run it through that formula, z stays small. And then the points that do not belong, we'll color those red, or some other color. It doesn't really matter. And so we already checked the point 1. We found that the number 1 does not belong to the Mandelbrot set, so it gets colored red. And had we checked these other points, we would find that they do not belong. And so you see, as you plot more and more of these points, a pattern starts to emerge. What's it going to look like?
Oh, it's one of those ink blot things where you can kind of like interpret this, like, I mean, that looks like aplasematic coloration. Like, maybe it's a fucking ladybug, or like, maybe it's like an embryo where the cells on the outside are the ectoderm and this is the endoderm. Maybe this is a diploblastic, not triploblastic organism like fucking sea sponge embryo. Like where there's no mesoderm. It's just 2 tissue layers in the embryo.
Well, you have the computer run through thousands and thousands of points. You have the computer check each one of those numbers, and a pattern emerges, and the pattern looks like this.
Yeah, like maybe like I'm looking up from the bottom of a toilet and some fat guy with a big scrotum is sitting down on it. I don't know. I mean, like, this could be anything.
It's really interesting and unexpected. Nobody was expecting that when you made a map of the Mandelbrot set, it would look like that. Remarkable. I'm going to remove the axes now, because it turns out this shape is remarkably interesting and unexpected.
I mean, it's interesting, I guess. I mean, like, I don't know if he's gonna get at these little things that kind of look like crosses, or, I mean, it looks more like bird's foot trefoil, or fucking a clover leaf venation, or, something like that. I mean, it also kind of reminds me of like a receptor on the outside of a cell. I mean, there are a lot of things that this kind of, looks like. It looks like, maybe some psychedelic rock, cover for an album, or maybe, a heavy metal band's icon, maybe their logo or something on their album. I mean, like, it could be a number, like, I'm still not seeing where he's going with this.
Expected, and it'll turn out to have a lot of beauty in it as well. The shape itself
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
is, I mean, this is a mathematical plot. I guess we'd expect it would have some mathematical properties to it, but everyone was surprised by the properties it has. The main shape that looks kind of like a heart, that's called a cardioid. And a cardioid is what happens when you take a circle and you take your pencil on it and roll it around another circle of equal size. The shape you'll get is a cardioid.
Okay.
And you can see that, sure enough, the main part of the Mandelbrot set is a perfect cardioid. All the other shapes that are growing off of it are circles. All these perfect circles attached to the perimeter of the Mandelbrot set. And then you see some other features, like these little tendrils that grow off of it, and a spike over on the left.
So remember at the beginning of this video where he said that, like, God speaks to us through things? How the fuck is anybody who's, like, not a mathematician or on crack going to go from this to God? I mean, come on, people.
Left, kind of that juts out. That's kind of interesting. You notice that that top circle there, it's got a circle on top of it, another one on top of it on smaller and smaller scales, and it goes out and forms this little tree, and it's got three stems to it, including the trunk. So it's got a trunk and two stems for a total of 3 branches. You see that there?
Yeah.
Now the next one to the left branches into 5. Can you see that? I mean, it's kind of small, but you can see the 5 branches there. The next one is 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. It's all the odd numbers. And by the way, they don't...
It's not all the odd numbers. Let me just see. Oh, I guess. I don't see a 1, but whatever.
Stop. They go to infinity. There's an infinite number of them. They get smaller and smaller, though, and so you have to zoom in more. But so somehow the Mandelbrot set knows how to count. It's kind of remarkable. And then on the other side, you have the odds and the evens. You have all the numbers there in terms of the number of branches. Now, it's remarkable enough that they have branches at all, because who would have thought that when you run numbers through that little formula, you get that shape? It's remarkable. Nobody was expecting that. And it's even more remarkable that it has the ability, apparently, to count in terms of the number of tendrils that grow off of each bud there. And, of course, you can take 2 of those numbers, like 5 and 3. Now, 5 plus 3 is 8, okay? And it turns out that the bud in between those 2 has 8 tendrils. Interesting.
I guess that is perfectly in between. Okay.
And that's true of all of them, both on the left side and the right. The bud in between the 2 adds the number of tendrils on each one. So not only does the Mandelbrot set know how to count, it knows how to add. And then on the left side over there, you got this kind of spike that goes out. And you see there's this little bump on the end of the spike?
I mean, the whole thing also, like, kind of looks like a fly's head to me. I mean, like...
So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So we'll zoom in on it. And that little bump, turns out, it looks like the entire Mandelbrot set. It's a...
Like, I would love to just get high off my ass and just, like, play around, like, with a picture of this, like, zooming in and out and, like, just, like, losing myself in this. I mean, like, that's cool. I mean, like, it's something new that I've never seen before. And, it's not really my cup of tea, but it is, it's interesting. Yeah, like, wonderful, actually. I like that. Like, it's aesthetically pleasing. There's something kind of fun about it. I mean, that's cute. Oh, that's very cute. Um, what's a Julia set? Oh, that's cute. I'm gonna get, like, all these tattooed on myself. No, I'm just kidding. But, oh. Like, this is like, if you need, like, anxiety relief, you can just, like, look at this. Um, Pseudocode. I wonder what that... Let me just put this all in R. I'm just kidding. Please don't make me get into R. Like, this is just, like, trippy shit. Like, that's a Dowaday rabbit. Whoa, holy cow. Alright, I'm gonna get, like, really distracted if I don't come back to this.
It's a mini Mandelbrot set. And it's almost identical to the parent, except it's got extra spikes growing off of it. But the basic shape's the same. It's got the cardioid and the circles. And
It also kind of, like, reminds me of, like, a yeast cell budding to reproduce itself.
it has a little spike growing off of it, too, with a little bump. What could that be? Well, let's zoom in on that. And, oh, interesting. Absolutely fat. And it's got extra spikes growing off of it. And that's got a little bud. How about that? Now, of course, you could do that literally forever. And there's an infinite number of baby versions built into the Mandelbrot set on smaller and smaller scales. And take a look at how small this is compared to the original when we zoom back out here. Look at how tiny it is. Isn't that remarkable? And the fact that it repeats infinitely, and it doesn't lose complexity, it actually gains it each time you get more extra spikes growing off of it. Very remarkable. Well, to anticipate my conclusion in this, I'm going to suggest to you that this shape tells us something
Oh boy, here it comes.
about the way God thinks. God's understanding is infinite.
I was getting more like a autistic person on shrooms vibe from this, but you do you, boo.
Numbers are an aspect of God's mind. God is responsible for numbers. And so it makes sense in the Christian worldview that when we explore and study,
Like, I don't know why he's, like, coming back to Christian worldview. Like, I mean, like, he hasn't gotten to creation yet. Not all Christian worldviews are the same. I mean, there are, tens of thousands of Christian sects. And,
numbers, we find intelligence in them. We find evidence of patterns. And not only intelligence,
define intelligence for me. I mean, like, that's cool and all, but, we have taken, numbers are not numbers are not a feature of the universe that's outside of the human mind. We came up with a number system in order to quantify things for ourselves. And it's basically just a descriptor. It's not a prescriptor. It is a descriptor that we came up with.
but infinite intelligence, because this thing repeats infinitely. A structure that repeats itself on smaller and smaller scales is called a fractal. So the
Yes.
Mandelbrot set is one example of a fractal. There are other types of fractals. There are other sections of the Mandelbrot set that are fractal. We could zoom in for
Mandelbrot. Yeah, the closed captions aren't perfect.
on one of these little tendril features here and zoom in on that. And you'd say, well, that's interesting. You think what's going to stop at some point, right? Eventually it'll even out and but it just keeps going. It's infinitely wiggly, you see. It
reminds me of some kind of fern.
Around like that, and you zoom in on it, and it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. It's just mesmerizing. Watch this thing and see the
This is really inconsiderate of people with photosensitive epilepsy, by the way.
Scale here, and it gives you a little taste of what God's mind is like, to be able to think infinitely. We can only process just a little bit of information at a time, but
we're 15 minutes in, and I don't know where else he's going with this, but if the rest of this video is him just pointing to the infinite nature of this and saying, well, God's mind is also infinite, I don't know what to tell you, people.
God's mind is truly infinite. So one of the interesting areas to explore, and what I want to do now is just kind of spend some time exploring this shape that exists.
I mean, the picture is confined to boundaries, so it's not really infinite. I mean, in one respect, I guess it is infinite, but it depends on your definition of infinite.
In the mind of God and has existed in the mind of God from creation, that was only.
I have a real quick question for this guy. If he's just trying to make the point that God's mind is infinite, couldn't he have just used the fucking number line and how it's fucking infinite? I mean, come on.
Discovered in the 1980s, and we can zoom in, for example, on this cusp between the main cardioid and the disc.
They look like birdies. Tweet, 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 like turkeys or like some shit like that.
We find they call it the Valley of the Seahorses, because you see over on the right side, it looks.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those do kind of look like seahorses. That's cute.
Like seahorses. They're upside down, because the way we've zoomed in on them here. Now, the colors are arbitrary. I can make them whatever I want, and we'll change them every now and then just to keep things interesting. But just keep in mind, black always represents numbers that do belong to the Mandelbrot set, and then colors represent those that do not belong to the Mandelbrot set. And bright colors are very close to being on the Mandelbrot set, but not quite a part of it. So let's zoom in on one of these seahorse structures over here. You see it looks like an upside-down seahorse. Isn't that fascinating? And quite beautiful. And I need to explain a little bit about what this means, because if the points are very bright, that means it's very close to the Mandelbrot set. And you might look and say, but yeah, that bright hub doesn't look like it's anywhere close to it. It is.
It's not the hub I'm thinking about right now, but that's for another story.
It's just, you need to realize that there is a very thin black thread that's wiggling around and making that shape, you see. It's just so thin, it's thinner than the pixels that the computer can plot. So everywhere you see structure like that, there is a very thin black thread that's winding around and creating that wonderful shape. Well, let's zoom in and find out what this seahorse is made of. It's the central hub there looks kind of like a spider web type structure, right? You got the spokes and the rims around there. And I found from experience, you can zoom in on the center of that till your heart's content, and it doesn't really change very much. It goes on infinitely. So again, the infiniteness of the mind of God. And so I thought, well, okay, let's go off to the side and figure out what the...
Is it just me, or like does the yellow center piece look like it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller? Like, is he playing with the zoom, or is it like an optical illusion if you look at it for long enough? I mean, it's giving me some really bad, like, sensory overload right now.
These strands of the spider web are made of. So let's go off to the side here. And we find that the strands are made of more spider webs, which is kind of interesting. And we zoom in a little bit more, and you find that there's sort of two hubs there. You see the bright yellow hubs.
I'm still waiting for him to make a point. He's just pandering to people who already believe what he believes.
And then in the middle, it goes from 2 to 4. And as we zoom in, it'll go from 4 to 8 to 16, 32, 64. It doubles.
Like, I wasn't expecting much, but, like, I was expecting marginally better than this.
Each time. And as we zoom in on that central hub...
Oh, God, please don't. Jesus Christ.
Oh, isn't that interesting? You see it going from 4
yeah,
to
I mean,
8
it's interesting, you know, but, like, what does this have to do with God?
And so on, and in the middle, of course, you have another baby Mandelbrot set. Quite fascinating, really. And again, there's an infinite number of these babies built in.
Because there's an infinite number of numbers. You know, you have, like, you can have 0.1, 0.11, 0.1111, 0.111111. I mean, like, come on, man.
To the overall shape, which I think is amazing. And again, look at how small this is compared to the overall shape as we zoom back out. It's just a tiny little infinitesimal, and we could have zoomed in on any one of those strands. I just picked one at random, and there it is. So pretty remarkable. Let's go back to that valley.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
The Valley of Seahorses is on the right. On the left, we find the Valley of the Double Spirals. And I'll zoom in on one of those now. This is my favorite part of the Mandelbrot set. I think they're very beautiful. They remind me of spiral galaxies, actually, which is an astronomer.
Maybe this guy has a Mandelbrot set kink.
really appreciate. God apparently likes spirals because he's built a lot of them into nature, and he's built them into math, which is remarkable. Who would have guessed that there would be a spiral, a beautiful spiral, built into that little formula, z squared plus c, or rather built into numbers when we run them through that formula. Pretty amazing. It's a double spiral because there's actually two strands that wrap around each other. If you trace one strand, you'll find that there's a strand in between. And so it is a double spiral, as are spiral galaxies, by the way. And let's zoom in on that a little bit. And again, I've found you can zoom in on the center forever, so we'll zoom in on the side. And you find the spiderweb type structures, you find more double spirals, and you find a new structure. I call them bow ties. They're kind of in the middle. You see it looks like kind of like a little bow tie, right? And it's got two.
Yeah, I can see that.
Double spirals that intersect in the middle. Quite beautiful. Again, what you're seeing here, the Mandelbrot set, it's just incredibly wiggly. It's so wiggly. It's making these wonderful shapes.
Should I make an ADHD joke? I'm just kidding.
And that's what the points that are very bright are very close to that thin black thread that's wiggling around and making all these wonderful shapes. So we'll zoom in on one of these bow ties.
I mean, it's soothing. I'll give him that. Like, it's really interesting. And, you know, this is a fun little thing here. I don't see it pointing to God, but, I mean, like, it's fun to look at. I mean, a lot of things are fun to look at.
And we find that again, you have the two double spirals. We zoomed in on a double spiral.
Oh, and it looks like there's a Mandelbrot set right in the center there. Is that what he's getting to next?
It's made up of multiple double spirals. And they go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 as we zoom in on the center there.
But inverse.
And in the middle, you find another mini Mandelbrot set. You're not surprised this time, but there it is. And it's quite
Mandelbrot set.
Beautiful. Who would have imagined that such beauty would be built into numbers? Well, in the Christian worldview, that makes sense.
How does... You know what? Never mind.
We serve a God who is beautiful, who makes beautiful things. And when we examine the way God thinks about numbers, which is what mathematics really is, we find it's immensely beautiful. All that, just a map of what numbers belong to that little formula when you run them through that algorithm.
Not just what numbers belong, just what numbers also don't belong, but, you know.
Isn't that fascinating? And this, of course, was astonishing to mathematicians when this was discovered back in the 80s.
What are we at for time on this? 42 minutes. Okay. Let me think. Oh, there's a video here. Yeah, I'm not gonna deal with that, but, like... Why don't we just keep going on?
So then it occurred to me, well, is there something special about that formula? I mean, did we just happen to stumble upon to an amazing formula? What happens if we change it? So I thought, okay, let's take, what happens if we go z cubed plus c? Well, I ran the computer code through that, and it turns out you get a different shape. Interesting.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's cool. I like it. I still don't know how this gets to God. I don't see what the overall point here is, but, you know, you can play around with computer things all day if you really want to, and, you know, make cool shapes. You know, it's kind of therapeutic, I guess.
And very similar in some respects, but different in others. The shape here, the main shape, is called a nephroid. A nephroid is what happens when you take a circle half the size of another and you roll it around, then you get that shape. And you can see it's a perfect nephroid. Really amazing. And then instead of circles growing off of it, you have cardioids growing off of it. Notice everything's gone up by one. The Mandelbrot set had a cardioid which has one valley. This one has a nephroid which has two.
Yes.
And the circles growing on it, which have no valleys, now are cardioids which have one valley. Everything's gone up by one. It kind of makes sense. We went from z squared to z cubed. I guess that makes sense. Okay, what happens when we go z to the fourth? Well, that's what you get. Okay, what happens if you go z to the fifth? Interesting. You notice the number of lobes is 1 less than the number. So z to the fifth, you get 4 lobes. Z to the sixth, you get 5 lobes.
Why is he counting lobes when this is supposedly infinite?
It occurred to me if I went z to the seventh, I could get snowflakes. And you sure do. And if you zoom in on it, do you get snowflakes? Absolutely. You zoom in on it, you get snowflakes everywhere. Isn't that wonderful? Did you know that such beauty was built into numbers? Okay, so what does all this mean? We got these wonderful shapes, and it's very pretty, Dr. Lau, but who cares? Well, I want to ask, what causes the beauty in fractals? Because I think you'd agree they're beautiful.
It's beautiful because we perceive it as something pleasant and we call it beautiful.
They're beautiful, and they're certainly complex, and so I have to ask what causes the complexity in them. The fact that when you zoom in, you get not only baby versions, but the complexity increases as you zoom in rather than decreases. What's causing that? So let's answer the first one first. What causes the beauty in fractals?
Alright, this is really hurting my eyes. This is really, really distressing me right now. Alright, now that I have, like, pain, like, from here to here and through here, I think I'm gonna call it there for now. Maybe I'll, watch television and get some sleep and, get back to this later, but that's just a little much. That's, I think where we're gonna, have part one be done for now, and, maybe part two he'll get to an actual point. This was a, I try to stay open-minded, and I shouldn't expect much from Answers in Genesis, honestly, but, the, the stuff that, they're pushing is just, I don't know. I don't know, man. People, humanoids, well, yeah, that was, what are we at here? 22 minutes and 33 seconds of my life I'll never get back. I mean, like, yeah, like, that stuff is kind of cool to look at, and, like, I mean, I've never been, like, tripping on, like, I mean, like, I've taken shrooms, but not, like, enough to make me, like, hallucinate, but, I've never hallucinated or tripped or anything like that, but, like, that's, like, what people might see when they're, like, tripping. I mean, like, it's just reminiscent of the stereotypical, like, hallucination, but, like, it's semi-soothing, it's a little nerve-wracking, not in an intellectual way, but just in, like, the movement of all those shapes and colors at once. It's just a little, like, smack you in the face type of thing for me. A little overwhelming. But the, video doesn't make any good points. I mean, like, it's just some guy showing off a fucking, you know, map of a, series or sequence or fractal, the Mandelbrot set. So, yeah. Stay tuned for part two.